Good morning, everybody. Last week, my lecture was interrupted. I do not want a repeat this week, and I'm not fully confident that I have resolved all the issues that led to the interruption last week. So this week, we're going to pre-record. Hopefully, by next week, we'll revert to our live broadcasts. I would like to touch on a couple of things before going into the substance of my lecture this morning. One of the things I would like to touch on is the person of El Rufai. If you followed me for any length of time, you will know very clearly that I have little love for El Rufai. I love his humanity, just like I love all human beings. But I find very little that I can agree with that man. I'm not one of those who mourned his incarceration. The only thing I would mourn is the fact that the law does not appear to be the basis for that incarceration or for his current trials. I am sure if we were to live in a law-based society, there are more than enough bases upon which to prosecute Nasir El-Rufai. The disappearance of that Diata is but one of many reasons. That is before you even start speaking to the many killings in southern Kaduna, the Kagoro killings and everything. But when El Rufai was picked up, I knew, like every other Nigerian, that he wasn't being picked up on account of anything he did wrong. Not that he hasn't done a lot wrong. But I do recall very clearly the words of Oshiomhole, where he said famously, "Join us and your sins will be forgiven." So I imagine that those who leave them have their sins unhearted and punished. As long as you punish sins, I wouldn't have had anything to say against it. Like my friend, Mr. Agbemi Holloway will say, if you don't want to be witch hunted, make sure you are not a witch. El Rufai is more than a witch, and I had very little sympathies for him when he was being witch hunted. But his sudden release in the course of this last week underscores the reality of our judicial system. In the first place, this man was lawfully remanded in custody, but of course, he was magisterially freed on account of the death of his mother. You clap for compassion, yeah, but where is the place of the law? A person duly remanded in custody could only ever have been freed by judicial pronouncement, not executive fiat. Whoever the person may be exercising that fiat, it still remains a fiat. Extrajudicial does not rise to the level expected of a space ruled by law. But then, Nigeria has hardly ever been ruled by law. It's always ever been the domain of small-minded men who rule without any regard for law or due process. So El Rufai is at home today because his mother died. How about all the many persons whose mothers and fathers and children, wives and husbands have died whilst they've been incarcerated, mostly unjustly? But then, those are the poor. We're not talking about a member of the ruinous class, the class that has kept Nigeria where it is today. In that same week, they had their APC convention, and you could see Senator Common Sense sat amongst the senseless, properly advertising the fact that he is nothing but a vacuous toad. Issa Salami also had his say. All I'll say to those who might be looking to eulogize the man is that they should go and read the NJC report on the gentleman. He's not deserving of any respect or response. And I'll leave that as that. This week, I'd like to speak to the subject, Nigeria, the duty to become. What do I mean by the duty to become? If you think back, You remember a time when Chief Obafemi Awolowo described Nigeria as a mere geographical expression. What did he mean? He meant that there was no Nigerian nation. He was pointing to the fact that Nigeria remained an aspiration at best. So the question is this: what have we done since he said so in the 50s? Have we become? How have we become? Where are we? How have we passed the duty to become? How have we achieved nationhood as a collective? Make no mistake about it, the Nigerian state is a collection of disparate nations. At the last count, we speak probably about 200 and something languages. Languages belong to nations. Those are probably the number of nations you can say have been trapped within this space. And the aspiration has always been to form a collective who share common purpose, common destiny out of this disparate whole and bring them together as a nation. Now, in doing this, there are multiple ways that nations are built. But what has become of the nation that was promised, where we spoke of, even though tribes and tongues may differ, in brotherhood we stand. One of the first things you do when you're looking to build a nation is to give them common destinies, common aspirations, give them reasons to want to band together as one. Today, you look across the length and breadth of Nigeria, you find a shift from the aspirational citizenship that was promised at its foundation. You find men becoming tribesmen. Instead of a national debate, all you get is our turn, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Nigerian nation that was to become had multiple milestones that it set for itself. One of them was health for all by the year 2020. It was modeled after the Alma Ata Declaration. The same people came together and said, oh, there must be the Abuja Declaration. This was when African leaders collectively sat together and agreed to pledge 15% of their budget to healthcare. Nigeria has rarely ever exceeded 4 to 7%. So in the area of healthcare, Nigeria as a nation, quote and unquote, have failed woefully. We could not even meet our own declaration. Other Africans came together in Abuja. They called it the Abuja Declaration. But we, who hosted the collective, to come to the point of declaring that this country will have health accessible to its subjects or citizens by the year 2000, we failed woefully. And today, Nigeria is even more unhealthy than ever. And to compound our situation, we have a new national health policy that is completely dependent on America, and our health data has become available to the Americans simply because we failed to become. 2020, we said there will be health care for all. 2020 was 26 years ago. An entire generation lost to slogan. The same 2000, housing was going to be available for all. We launched it in 1991, National Housing Program, we called it. It was going to give us affordable housing for Nigerians. We were targeting 17 to 20 million houses. But today, We have a deficit in the housing stock that is stratospheric when you even think about it. You find that one, we failed woefully at every point to offer any concrete plans to achieve this housing for all goal. Nigeria today has a housing deficit of almost 30 million units. People are still living under bridges in the urban areas, and in the rural areas, people are living in what should not even pass for accommodation. 1991, we launched this. This is where we are today. Government cannot even provide affordable housing. You should see the joke in doing states as rich as Lagos. They'll tell you that they are providing affordable housing, and you're asking people to come and pay in excess of 50 million naira. Even the civil servants at director level cannot afford housing. They are perpetual tenants, subjected to the whims and caprices of exploitative landlords. Where the state has failed to provide housing, they began to roll out silly laws designed to provide social housing based off private capital. This is the evil that has overtaken our country. To build slogans all the time. How about Vision 2010? That was Abacha's plan. He targeted single digit inflation, less corruption, democratization, anchoring the country to the rule of law. That died with Abacha. And then the United Nations came with the Millennium Development Goal, brought all kinds of targets, deadlines, global pacts to eradicate poverty, hunger, and disease by 2015. They were going to do that by 2015. Today, we have one of the highest poverty rates in the entire world. We have overtaken India as the poverty capital of the world. Yet, we have our Millennium Development Goal. The reality is that today, you have 140 million Nigerians living below the poverty line. The poverty ratio in Nigeria today is 62%. 62% of our populace are living in poverty. As at 2019, it was just 40%. But the situation has escalated exponentially. And today, 62% of Nigerians are living below the poverty line. When you turn these into actual numbers, you're talking about 141 million Nigerians who are living in poverty, multi-dimensional poverty. In the first place, they don't have any electricity. Take that off the table in relation to these ones. They have no water to drink. Take that in relation to these ones. No housing. Because when you are talking about living below the poverty line, you're talking especially about those who are already rejected by society, living on the edge of society. Future is bleak, nothing to hope for. This is the seeding ground for terrorism, the seeding ground for religious extremism, the seeding ground for criminality. That is where we are today as a collective. Oh yeah, electricity for all by the year 2000. $16 billion later, this is where we are. The national grid is always collapsing. Our grid, our rulers' grid never collapse, but the national grid constantly collapses. Constantly. The only thing you can be sure of, whether you're in band A, B, C, or Z, you'll be lucky to have 4 hours of electricity in a day. Even Bulaba and the presidency have moved away from the national grid. They've now become environmentalists, greens, you have solar power in the seat of power. Me and you, the common man, have been completely forgotten. And then the president was busy crowing at his APC convention, talking about how Nigeria has moved ahead of so many. He said we were second in renewable energy. The shameless lies that issues forth from those who rule Nigeria is a case study on its own. But that is not the story for today. You look at our people and you begin to understand that when a society has become as fractured as our own has been, when there appears to be no basis for shared destiny, the capacity to become is lost. All that begins to happen is that the nation becomes unbecoming. Today in Nigeria, we have a problem with social cohesion. The African Polling Institute measures that Nigerian social cohesion is at 46.8%. That is below the 50% benchmark for a stable society. So, how do you become? How does a state that we can be proud of emerge from these ruins? Because make no mistake about it, what we have in front of us is ruination. A nation does not become with these depressing statistics. You have the crisis of trust, which is the vertical fracture. 83% of Nigerians do not trust the executive. 83% have no trust in our executive branch. The executive does not mean Tinubu alone. It includes your governors, it includes your local government chairmen, it includes the executives of state institutions and companies. It simply means that there is a huge trust deficit in those who rule Nigeria. And that shouldn't come as a surprise. The results suggest that there is nothing to trust. So, can you blame a people when they look to those who have ruined their lives and conclude that 83% of us do not trust you? When you think that that is bad enough, look to the National Assembly. 88% of Nigerians do not trust members of the National Assembly. And how do you go about the business of trusting a people who have shown themselves manifestly incapable of protecting your interests or your rights or doing anything to better your circumstances? So today, 88% of Nigerians have zero trust in the National Assembly. You talk about the judiciary as the last hope of the common man. What is the situation with the judiciary? 79% of Nigerians have no trust in the Nigerian judiciary. These are readily available online. It's the African Polling Institute that put these figures out there. And I'm surprised that in the case of the judiciary, it's not even higher than 79% distrust. Because what is it about our judiciary that inspires confidence? The last hope of the common man is adjudged untrustworthy by 79% of the respondents. The reality is that the Nigerian state is collapsing because of this crisis of trust. Before you finish dealing with that, you have the crisis of identity, which is the horizontal fracture. What does it mean? He says, tribe and tongues may differ, but in brotherhood we stand. This is a lie. The reality today is that the ethnic nation remains supreme above the Nigerian idea. The reality again is that when you look at the many divides that have been brought by those who are meant to rule, you find very quickly that Nigeria has been fractured into, okay, because of Bulaba and the emergence of Peter Obi in 2023. What you found very quickly was that political discourse descended into tribal arguments. our locum. That is against the backdrop of a country that has evolved a power sharing arrangement that is based on ethnicity. So all of a sudden, instead of discussing the merit of candidates, we're talking about their ethnic origin. As if that wasn't bad enough, this was compounded with religion. So today, instead of talking about a country that has come into itself, that has evolved with shared identity, what we have today is identity politics, based essentially on ethnicity and on religion. You have the displacement of one Nigeria, complete displacement of one Nigeria, because of the inequities that have been promoted by the Nigerian state and the refusal to treat all equally. What you have today is that every conflict is interpreted through the prism of ethnicity, and rightly so in most cases. Or how else do you explain what is famously referred to as farmer herders clash? There are no farmer herders clash. What you have is Fulani redentism that have been allowed to be militarized. And this has led to a situation where Fulani marauders, mostly sometimes from outside of Nigeria, allowed in Nigeria, mollycoddled in Nigeria, overrunning settlements in the Middle Belt and increasingly in the South, increasingly in the Southwest. What you have today is that Nigeria has been balkanized into ethnic conclaves, and persons do not see any destiny that is shared by all. What we have instead of a shared destiny is a fractured state where, even though there is a line, they're talking about the Nigerian state, within those lines, you have multiple fractures based on ethnicity, based on religion, and the capacity to emerge as a nation has been compromised. And then you add to this the Japa syndrome. 70% would leave if they had the capacity to leave. A lot have not left simply because they can't leave. They are either too poor to leave or they are happy with the status quo because they expect to trade it for some advantages at some point. So instead of a state that is becoming, we have a state that has become unbecoming. Instead of citizens, we have tribesmen. Instead of national debate, you have it is our turn. National identity has dissolved into hostile ethnic territory. You have a collapse today of the social contract. Why? Because the state cannot provide security. The person in the middle belt cannot depend on the state to protect them. The persons in the southwest cannot depend on the state to protect them. The persons in the southeast cannot depend on the state to protect them. The persons in the northeast, northwest cannot depend on the state to protect them. You have situations in the northwest, particularly in Katsina, Buhari's home state, where the state functionaries are constantly meeting with terrorists, seeking peace and detente, so that the people might be able to return to their farms just to have basic livelihood. That is the state that we have built in the place of the one that we have always aspired to have. The social contract is collapsing because the state itself is collapsing. You have an institutional hollowing out when the courts, police, the central bank, other institutions of state that are meant to project the powers of the state and to protect those who are meant to be citizens, they've all failed woefully to varying degrees. The Minister of Defense, who was greeted with fanfare when he was announced, what has he become? The Chief Security Officer at APC convention in Abuja. Citizens are being killed in their numbers, but instead of looking to protect the lives of citizens. The person who was greeted with fanfare is the same person who is busy politicking. The primary duty for which he was brought, secure the lives and properties of Nigerians, have been relegated into the background. Today, Nigerians are assailed from all sides. Lakurawa here, Boko Haram there. They have one name or the other for it. Kwara, mostly lost. Ekiti, constantly attacked. Ondo, under pressure. This is Nigeria. Instead of we're becoming a failed state instead of becoming a nation. What about mental immigration? What you find is that most of the youth have checked out of Nigeria emotionally. They've detached themselves and see themselves outside of Nigeria, the country whose duty it is to protect these persons have largely failed, woefully if I may add, in the duty of protection. So the social contract has unraveled, and in its place, all you find is chaos. Everywhere you look, anarchy. The state is incapable of doing anything. So you find very quickly that those who remain have lost the capacity to remember what had happened. We've evolved historical amnesia. When the people stop learning from their history, we enter a loop where the same mistakes are constantly repeated. And instead of learning from our errors, we continue to stumble from one problem into another. Nigeria would appear to have entered a loop where it's constantly entering one crisis after the other, with temporary relief from time to time, but never any advancement that can be meaningfully pointed to. The displacement of one Nigeria is almost complete. And you look all around you and you begin to ask, at what point is this nation going to become? At what point? I do not want to speak in lamentation, but it is critical that if we must come out of the mess we are in, we must acknowledge where we are. Where we are today is a state that is failing in slow motion. It has failed to become, and in failing to become, it has dragged those who are trapped within its territory into an abyss from which we can only hope to rise when we have come to acknowledge where we are. Where we are today is a state that has failed in all ramification, has refused to run the race that is set before it because none has actually been set before it. It's not yoked to any vision. It merely stumbles from crisis to crisis, from one problem into another. Every developmental aspiration that had ever been set before the Nigerian state has been missed. None of the things that have bound other people together has had any effect on the Nigerian. Call ourselves the giant of Africa. What does it take to be a giant? How do you become a giant? You do not become a giant simply because you are big. You can be big for nothing, and that is what Nigeria has essentially become. Big for nothing. Because exactly what have we done with our size? As big as we are, we can't feed ourselves. Poverty has accelerated in our land. As big as we are, we can't secure our borders. If anything, insecurity has multiplied. As big as we are, this country cannot provide potable water for its citizens. As big as we are, no electricity in spite of 16 billion squandered by the Obasanjo regime. As big as we are, we can't even educate our children. Nigeria has 20 million children out of school. How do you become with these gory indices? How? How does this country expect to become when everything is suggestive of a place that has already been balkanized and that is already being shared by those who have destroyed it? How does it become? Iran has been under one form of sanction or the other for over 40 years. It hasn't stopped it from developing missile technology, aerospace technology. They probably have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. They're bombing them, their electricity has not dimmed. National grid had not collapsed in spite of the fact that they are being bombed. They have crude, we have crude. We probably have more natural gas than Iran. But what has happened to us? In the absence of visionary leadership, our country has slid into the abyss. We have a duty to become, even if it is only for our children. We have a duty to become, even if it's only for posterity. But what are the bases for becoming? A country that can tolerate 20 million children out of school, that is the population. That population is multiple times higher than many Gulf states. But it cannot become because those who are meant to shepherd it have become as ravenous wolves. How do we become when the primary function of the state would appear to be the protection of its ruiners and the assurance that they must live as though they are kings? The citizens have become victims, but the ruiners have become pashas, living as though they are kings in prehistoric times. Equal above the law, all of them, but the citizens as victims. How do you become? How? Exactly how is a state supposed to become when you have so much poverty in the land? When the people sees the country itself as the biggest of their enemies? How does a country emerge out of all of this? The sad situation with Nigeria and the reality of Nigeria is that if we do not take deliberate actions to become, this country will implode with cataclysmic consequences. Nigeria was a geographic expression, according to Obafemi Awolowo. It remains exactly that, even today. More than 60 years after those words were uttered, it remains just a geographic expression. But the geographic expression it has become is a most ruinous one for the victims that are trapped within it. Everything has degraded, and everywhere you look, all you find is putrefaction. I have not come around this morning merely to wail. I have come to point out something. You and I, all of us, who are the victims of Nigeria, we have a duty to become. But how do you become? You become by uniting yourselves behind common goals and agenda. As I promised you some weeks back, we would be opening the portals once the completion of the website, once the website is completed, and I believe that should be this week. So by next week, as we are entering a new month, we'll open the registration portals. We have to have the citizenship project. Nigerians have to unite behind common purpose and common goals. And these common purposes and common goals will form the foundation for shared destinies. It is only in that that we can find the grace to come out of the mess we're in. It's not about slogans. It's about positive steps and positive actions taken by us as a collective. That is the only thing that can save us from this mess. In the absence of becoming, Nigeria will implode. Those of us who have the understanding of the fact that an implosion is not in our interest will continue to do what we can to avoid that implosion. But the duty to build, to become, belongs to all of us as a collective. It cannot be left to individuals. Votrons will not save Nigeria. It will take the collective to save this country. It is that collective that I am calling to this morning. We have a duty to become a country we can be proud of, become a people who are not a reproach to humanity, and become a country that our children will be happy to inherit from us. The Jackpot syndrome you see is the clearest indictment on the failure to become. Nigeria is a beautiful country. Nobody would have left this place if they had experienced anything good within its space. I'm not sure any Nigerian will leave Nigeria if they can actualize themselves within the boundaries of this country. But Nigeria has become a most hostile environment in which to find actualization. And this is why a lot of people are running away. Remember what I just told you. 70% of Nigerians would leave if they had the opportunity to leave. And this is why you find Nigerians in all kinds of places, because they are running away from what they can see. If we are to ever reverse this trend, we would have to change the way we have done things. We can't depend on the persons in government. They are enjoying the status quo. It suits them. It is in balkanizing us and in ensuring that we do not ever emerge as one that they feed. The basis of their wealth is our division. The basis of their longevity is in us continuing to fight ourselves. At some point, we are going to have to get with the program and understand very clearly that if Nigeria is to ever become, it will be because we made that happen. I really, really hope that you see the sense in becoming, because the alternative is scary. We're already seeing glimpses. In Nigeria today, you have almost 4 million people in IDP camps. That is because of the failure to become. The state has failed to protect in the most basic of its duties of the social contract. The state has failed. That is the duty to protect lives and properties. Within the state of Nigeria, there are actors contending with the Nigerian state. And most of these actors, by the time you look deeper, you find that they are state-sponsored. That is the extent of putrefaction that has befallen this country. I could spend 3 hours instead of 30 minutes, but it wouldn't change the basis of what I want to talk to you about, which is the duty to become. In the absence of becoming, there is an implosion awaiting. I hope we find the grace to avoid this. I'm done for this week. I'll see you next week. Hopefully by then, we would have a basis to progress with the citizenship project. Have a blessed week ahead, and God bless you all.